Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. A Glimpse of the Kingdom can remain free because of generous donors like you. If you'd like to donate, feel free to do so online, or you can send payments through Facebook Messenger. Don't forget to tell your friends about it so that they can enjoy this ministry as well. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any podcasts.
You can listen to my daddy every single day, like in the gym, in the car, or just at home. Glimpse of the Kingdom is awesome!
Hello, and thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm David Pendergrass. I got an email the other day from a listener who asked me a very good question and asked me to clarify something I said. He was listening to a podcast I gave on the Apostle Paul. It's an introduction to the Apostle Paul, or Saul Paul, and I hope you can listen to that podcast. I think a good introduction. And I said, I think toward the end of it, at one point when I said that Paul was not a Christian, I might have said something on the lines of, if you call Paul a Christian, that's bad theology. And he said, hold on a second. So here I'll quote the questioner. He says this, quote, "So being Jewish is both an ethnicity and a religion, correct? So saying that Paul never stopped being Jewish from an ethnic standpoint is understandable, but I thought I also heard you say that he was also still a Jew religiously. You then went on to call him a Jewish Christian. So I'd like to understand the dividing lines here. So any ethnic Jew that is a follower of Jesus would fall under Jewish Christian, correct? Any Gentile that is a follower of Jesus is simply called a Christian? Question mark. End quote. The answer is yes." That's it. Short podcast. I should have done a better job unpacking that, and it is a good question. I should have done a better job. And let me unpack that a little bit more. Yes, typically in scholarship, when we use the word Jewish Christian, it's to emphasize the Jewish ethnicity of the person. And just like back then, like today, a Jewish Christian means typically that they still partake in various Jewish customs and rituals that Jews do. Jews might celebrate Rosh Hashanah or certain holy days or the Passover meal and so forth. That's awesome. In Paul's day, they sure did. And as the temple stood, they would have gone to the temple and had prayers at the temple and had fellowship and done certainly the religious high holy days of the time, not eaten pork and so forth. So they would have lived very Jewishly, you might say. However, because of Christ, those things that made them outwardly a Jew to others, like being circumcised and kashrut, the dietary restrictions, and observing the holy days, these things were no longer considered the way to be a part of the people of God. We might say this way, it's no longer salvific. The problem with saying the term no longer salvific, and this is a huge topic, maybe I ought to talk about this sometime, is the typical churchy answer is, all the way back to Martin Luther, is Jews were trying to earn their salvation, and they just were blessed their heart, they were failing miserably, then Jesus came along and showed them you can't do that. That whole image from most modern New Testament interpreters has completely gone away. Ever since Kirster Stendahl, A.P. Sanders, and others, and then Jimmy Dunn, N.T. Wright, and others, there's several major problems with that. One is it assumes that Jews in the ancient world thought they were legalists. That is, they were trying to earn anything. And you are hard-pressed to find in the Bible too many references of the Jews trying to earn something. Two, and this is a big problem, is you're hard-pressed to find any evidence in the Old Testament or in the first century, we call Second Temple period. So that's, say, a few hundred years BC to the fall of the temple in AD 70, that intertestamental time. You're hard-pressed to find any example where Jews thought of salvation as between heaven and hell. Jews in the ancient world did not think that way. They didn't think of heaven, entering heaven when you die. They didn't think of going to hell when you died. In general, every Jew that believed in an afterlife believed you went to the same place, Sheol. It's just the place where dead people go. And so the sacrificial system was not set up to demarcate who goes to heaven and who goes to hell, or AKA who gets saved. They just didn't think that way. These demarcations between the sheep and the goats and all that stuff, when Jesus speaks, is not unique, but it is revolutionary. It's in that time period that they start really speaking of a place of punishment, and then of course a place of reward. Anyway, that's not in the old system. And so when you say that the Jews were trying to earn something by getting circumcised, it's very controversial today to say such a thing in most Pauline circles. That is to say, specialists, human being scholars who specialize in Pauline studies. So what most scholars say when they say Jewish Christian, or the Apostle Paul, Saul Paul, is that he was a Jew who followed Jewish customs, but he followed Jewish customs having radically changed his mind about the function of those customs. The function. They no longer, those religious customs don't give you new birth and new creation. You can do to be a Jew, and he doesn't have a problem with Jews being Jews and getting circumcised and so forth. But those things are not salvific. There's a little thought experiment scholars like to think: if the Apostle Paul had a son, would he have circumcised him? And some say no, and many disagree. I'm one that disagrees. I think Paul would have circumcised his son and just told him adamantly, but you understand, the circumcision, you're doing it because you're a Jew. It's part of the long tradition of our people. But in no way does this make you part of the God's Messiah people. To be a follower of Jesus the Messiah, you don't need to be circumcised before you enter into a relationship with the Messiah. You just need to go to the Messiah. So this becomes the major debate of the early church, manifested in its peak, it seems to be, in Acts 15, the so-called Jerusalem Council. As these Jewish Christians, that's by the way, that's all the first disciples are Jewish Christians. Because they're all Jews. Everybody's a Jew in the first church. Every single person's a Jew. We can read the book of Acts and notice that the earliest disciples still go to the temple to pray when they were there, at least in Jerusalem. And so they didn't just abandon the temple all of a sudden because Jesus was crucified and raised from the dead. They still behaved like Jews. They probably never ate pork their entire lives. They probably celebrated Jewish festivals and holidays their entire lives. But very quickly, we see that they start really coming to grips with the ramifications of the saving death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus of Nazareth. That it makes everything that comes before in those rituals effete. That is to say, it no longer is effective. To be in the people of God, you're not to be circumcised. To be in the people of God, you need to follow Jesus. Well, that really opens up the door to Gentiles. And that's one thing Jews in Jesus' day were very adamant about, particularly the very sacred ones like the Pharisees, who were very, very adamant about ritual purity. You didn't want to eat alongside Gentiles, but there was hopes in various Old Testament texts that in the end of time, near the shift of the ages, Gentiles would come into the fold of Israel's fold. And so you see text in Joel and other places. So the Apostle Paul sure seems to have believed that because Jesus has come, that new day has dawned. And the doors have been burst open, and now Gentiles and Jews have access to the same faith in Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, but when a Gentile Christian is a Christian, they're still called Christians, but it means that Gentile Christians don't seem to have ever have been required to perform Jewish rituals. So Gentile Christians were not required, depending on the context and area, but certainly by the end of the first century, then after the fall of the temple, almost certainly, probably very few Gentile Christians got circumcised at all, certainly not within the Jewish custom. Their parents might have made them, but not for non-religious reasons. They wouldn't have celebrated Jewish holidays. They would not have stopped eating pork and so forth. That is, they would have not adopted Jewish religious rituals at all. And so a Pauline Christianity dominated. And that's why there lives on, at least for a few centuries, as far as we can tell, through a group called the Ebionites, seemed to be the last group of Jewish Christians of the era. Ebionites still practiced very much Jewish rituals. and also believe Jesus was the Messiah. Okay, so when we say Jewish Christian, we mean ethnically Jewish, but still believe in Jesus as the Messiah. And when we say Christian without the word Jewish in front of it, it means a Gentile Christian. And that is precisely what I meant when I said it's bad theology to call Paul a Christian. Because in that demarcation, it assumes that the Apostle Paul abandoned Jewish customs and rituals. And that's almost certainly what did not happen. If you read his documents, his letters, and the book of Acts certainly sheds light on his, well, that's debated, but I think it does shed light on the life of Paul. Let me say maybe a couple more quick things. One is, when we say the word Christian, I've never heard this ever described correctly, besides I think maybe once or twice in scholarship, but no person has ever got this right. The word Christian literally doesn't mean Christ follower, doesn't mean, and growing up I heard this for years and years, it means little Christ. No, it doesn't. Christian is a very weird word. It's an odd word because it is comprised of two words, kind of, you might say, from two different languages. Christian is a word applied to people who follow Jesus. They call themselves apparently the way, like when Jesus says in John 14, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. They call themselves the way, apparently. And that also fits in a Jewish background when they had the two ways, the way to destruction and the way to life. And we see that in the Qumran documents, that they love to talk in this two-way form. But when people spoke of these people, they called them Christians because Christ, from Christos, from the Greek, which literally means anointed one, the Hebrew equivalent of Christos is Meshiach, or Messiah in English. Christos and Meshiach both mean anointed one. But the ending, Ianus, Christianus, Ianus is from Latin. And you know that. I know that you know it. You may not realize you know it. But you know that's a Latin ending. And that Latin ending, when it's applied to a word, means one who is associated with. You know that word because if you ever call a person from a particular city, you're speaking Latin. For example, when I lived in Houston, people from Houston are called, that's right, Houstonians. Houstonians. That does not mean a little Houston, which sounds so stupid. It means one who is associated with Houston, one who is from Houston, but it really means one who is associated with, one who is affiliated with Houston. And Seattleian or Philadelphian, Christian, one who's associated with Christ. So that is literally what Christian means. So if you take that etymology, yes, the Apostle Paul is a Christian. Absolutely. Abso-stinkin-lutely. He is a very adamant Christian. And that's very, very good theology. And that's where I was wrong not to nuance this better than I did in that study, because I didn't want to be misleading, obviously, never want to be, but I'm afraid I was. So once again, the distinction I'm making is it's wrong to use the word Christian of Paul if you're using it in the typical way, which is it means Gentile Christian, someone who is no longer practicing Jewish rituals. That would be false. That's bad theology because Paul is a Jewish Christian. If by Christian you mean someone who's associated with Christ, they've given themselves to Jesus and his follower and so forth, well then yeah, he's a Christian. Absolutely. Hope that helps. And that is at least what I meant to say. If this causes more ambiguity or confusion, let me know and I'll do my best to mess it up again. God bless. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you'll listen more. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com. There are tabs at the top that let you have access to all the podcasts I've recorded, to sermons I've done, books I've written. They're all there at davidpendergrass.com. You can also check me out on Facebook, facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom, facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom, and also look at my Twitter feed at glimpse the kingdom or at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass. There's tons of ways reached out. I hope you will. Send me your questions, send me your comments. If you'd like to support the ministries of Glimpse of the Kingdom, you can also find ways to give online on davidpendergrass.com. If you'd like for me to come and do some consulting, check out my website, davidpendergrassconsulting.com. and I'll be happy to come out and speak to your organization and help and train any way I can. God bless you. See you online.